So sorted. Okay, so topic for today is navigating massive code bases. Uh, First of all, why this topic is like why I am talking about this topic is for some weird reason. I'm I'm I have been surrounding myself with massive code bases. Although I don't contribute to open source, but I love to understand how they structure the code base. Like few reasons, few very selfish reasons is I want to write good quality code and I'm not good at it. So reading massive code bases uh, helps me understand the best practices the projects have followed, how they like why they took a certain decision a certain way is what I get to know from that. So that's my selfish reason number one. Number two is while I do that, I always try to implement the core, like maybe a few, like maybe an interesting optimization I got to know, or maybe an interesting pattern, an interesting low level pattern I get to know that's there. But the key thing is that optimization, that algorithm, that intricate detail that I get to know, I actually recode, or actually I basically code it in some different language to build a deeper understanding. So I solved two purpose by exploring code bases. So to set the context, few code bases that I have spent a lot of time reading, although I'm not pro at them in any means. I started with C Python, the source code of the Python language. That was one thing that I started with from early days. That's one. Second was Redis, very simple C language code, but some of the optimizations or some of the algorithmic implementations that it just blew my mind. That's second. Then I've had my fair share of experience with Apache Spark because of my day job. I get to work on Spark, so I did spend some time going through it. Rewrote a couple of modules there. Obviously, we did not contribute it back yet, but did get a chance to go through a really sophisticated Java code base. Something that I did that I never thought I would do, but I kind of find it amusing the kind of design decisions they took. So that's the context that why I love, like why I wanted to talk about this, and why I have some very interesting pointers to share. Right. So we'll keep it very interactive this time because there are a bunch of questions that like I because I know that there are more questions from your ends rather than me blabbering a lot. So which is where I have set the context. So I'll just start with the seed question, which was like I already started answering it. That why should we spend time talking about like why should we spend time understanding massive code bases? I gave you a few reasons, right? Now the next thing that I want a few of you to answer is how do you like what do you think should be the criteria of you picking a code base, right? So it's not about which code base have you picked, like you can go in that direction, like which code base you picked, if you ever picked one, a big code base to explore. Maybe open source, may not be open source, perfectly fine, but don't spill any secrets. The idea being that what makes you inclined towards a specific code base, interest or whatnot. I would just love to hear your thoughts on that. Right. So pulling a few folks in. Feel free to raise your hands. Like basically request for mic. When I say raise your hands, basically request for mic, and I'll pull you in. I see Bisu adding it. I'm approving Bisu. Go on, Bisu. Yeah.
Currently work at an investment bank, and the code base, what I have experienced is like pretty massive. And what I understand is it's imperative to dig into a code base because there are a lot of connecting pieces, and if you do not
Hmm.
understand the code base well, what ends up happening is you change one thing and you break the second thing, and there's a lot of rework involved when that happens.
So like obviously being at a workplace you had no other option but to pick that code base, like so like you were left with no choice, but that but you brought up a very interesting point that because like you need to know the code base well, it does not mean you need to know. Acha, but by the way, do you think you need to know every single line of code written in the code base?
Nobody knows that. Even the developer who is working for 10 years on the same code base does not know
Hmm.
every single line, but he knows what to look for in the code base.
Can you give an example? You can mask it, but an example, so
Um,
something like a parallel example to that.
yeah, so what happens is we have people on support, like it's a very common norm in IT companies, right? So if a
Hmm.
production issue occurs, somebody like me would have to like go line by line, debug stuff. But the senior
Hmm.
developer knows like exactly which module, or he has an idea of which module actually achieves that functionality. So he directly jumps inside that module.
So basically, something that at least points you to the right direction.
Yeah,
That's more critical. Hmm.
yeah, so in something what they end up doing with that is once you have an issue, they end up documenting it, and then you go and refer the documentation, and then the documentation ends up referring you to the right direction.
Hmm. Super. Thanks for adding that point. Okay, so few things here to summarize is first of all, although the three examples I gave were all three open source code bases, but obviously when you work at a workplace, the proprietary code of your workplace itself would be massive, given that hundreds of engineers work on that. So that also qualifies to be a massive code base. The first point that we should all relate to is the fact that the code base that you work at your workplace, you need to know it very well. Now, as Bisu added, that no one typically knows every single line of code that has been going on. Right? No one has a clue of every single business logic, every single algorithm that runs behind the scene. Right? But a very good point that was brought up was the fact that you at least need to know what to look for, and that's very important because although you don't know the right answer or the right thing, but if you know how to navigate to that itself is a superpower. For example, I'll give a very practical example from my experience. So when I first started going deep into C Python code base, the first thing that I did was like I didn't know where to start, right? So we'll talk about the that problem in a minute, but what I did is I just thought that hey, which is the simplest operation in Python? It's like addition of two numbers sounds very simple. So I'm like, add should be calling add or addition. So what I did is I just looked for add in the code base, found a bunch of references, found a bunch of instances where the word add was used, like 500, 600 files. And then I just started picking up files at random. Through that, I got to know about a nomenclature. They call it pi number. I'm like, oh, this like obviously we do addition on numbers, but I did not think that hey Python would be calling it number. I thought they would be calling it integer or float or something. Then I found a file called pi number. I'm like, okay. Then I saw and figured out that hey, for every data type there is a file. Then every method has a nomenclature that if I'm looking for an add function, it would be pi number underscore add. Right? If I want to do multiplication, it would be pi number underscore mult. Something like that. So by just skimming through the code base, you would know the kind of patterns in the variable names. When I say pattern, I should actually use the right word. The conventions that a code base follows. Right? And that's good enough for most use cases because you are not supposed to know every single line of code, every single business logic, but at least if you can chop down the time that it requires you to reach to the right location, even if you minimize that, because that's the most time taking thing, that if you want to change something and it takes you a lot of time to figure out the right location, that itself is frustrating, would be the right word to use. That hey, I don't know where should I make the change, especially when a code is highly abstracted. You can easily get lost. It's a labyrinth, right? And you can easily get lost in a massive pile of abstraction, right? Which is where it's very important to know the code base enough so that you can navigate to the right place as fast as you can, right? And which is what you would see a lot of senior folks doing this. So you might see, like, a lot of junior folks typically think, hey, senior would know every line of code and every single thing and every single logic. That's not true. Not They definitely don't know it. Right? But when you observe them, you would see that they are very quick in hitting, like reaching the correct file, and that's very important. Now it's more about when you absorb. So that's the first point that I wanted to talk about, is basically absorbing the patterns, absorbing the conventions of the code base. That should be your step zero. And when you are opening up a code base, pick any code base that you like, right? Try to absorb the conventions that the code base follows. This way you will feel at home, right? At least you will not be spending time reaching the right place. At least you would be inching closer to the place where you need to make the change, or you need to understand the code and whatnot, right? You are not like it's not that it's part of a file in a particular model and you are looking at some totally random model. That should not happen. So spend some time understanding the conventions of a code base, and that's how you do it. Okay. But let me pull in someone else. Anyone who has explored some open source code base? Any tips on how did you decide a particular code base you should be like that you chose to go through? Anyone? None? No open source fanatics? Okay, no worries. Pratik requested. Let me pull you in, Pratik. Give him a minute. Yeah, Pratik, go on.
Yeah, so for me, it's basically two things. One is some kind of tech that I want to learn, so maybe Rust or something.
Mm-hmm.
Then I would try to learn as well as contribute so that I get some hands on as well. And the other thing is something I like, or some kind of commercial open source company that maybe I would like to join. So I that's like the two things that I usually think before contributing to some code base or any open source projects.
The first point that you brought up was interesting. Like you said that the tech that you would want to follow, like
Correct.
you gave an example of Redux. Like,
Correct.
can you elaborate on a specific instance where you picked a code base because of how they leverage Redux or something like that?
Um, so, in my experience, Redux isn't a very, relevant. I would say I wanted to learn about making CLIs in Go. That was
Hmm.
one thing that I was interested in, and the same thing for us as well. But
Hmm.
I am learning Go for some time right now, so I just
Hmm.
wanted to understand more about it. So there is
Okay.
this project called Infisical, which is like
Hmm.
a secret ops, open source secret ops kind of a
Hmm.
project where they have a CLI.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
I went there and tried to, join the Slack and started contributing. So yeah, that was one
Hmm.
of the things which I think it was for in the beginning it was very overwhelming, but some
Hmm.
small things and then eventually a little bit more I'm able to contribute and stuff like that. So yeah, that would be one example I can give maybe.
Oh, nice. So your main motive was to learn a particular tech. That's
Correct.
how. But how did you stumble upon that project?
So you can do Google. That is one thing. And but in
Hmm.
case of this in physical, usually a lot of projects that come up and is interested, like the ones that I'm interested in, is usually through Twitter only. So I follow a lot of this thing, open source people, and also some accounts which
Hmm.
continuously, if something happens or if they launch something, they tweet about it. So
Hmm.
I've been following them. I saw this. I think it was Cause or some account which tweeted about them.
Hmm.
I just went in there. I
Hmm.
saw, okay, their project is in Go. Front end is obviously on React, something that I'm comfortable with, and Go is something that I wanted to learn more about. They have a CLI project as
Hmm.
well as. other things. So I just went there and
Mhm.
started contributing to that.
But let me ask you a counter question. Why only that project? Why not some other Go project?
Yeah, I mean, it's not like only that. I could also contribute to some other. But
Mhm.
the other point was also that the team was very small, and the project was not very huge. So not a lot of people
Mhm.
were there to contribute actively. So that gives me a
Mhm.
place where I can go there, and that gives me an opportunity for a lot of issues that are open.
You are bringing us some amazing points.
So
So,
that was one of the reason I was
mhm.
more interested towards it, because if I go right now for some very popular CLI projects, or like a Rust CLI project,
Mhm.
right, what I've seen
Mhm.
is a lot of people go there, and before, like, I can't wait for like 6 hours as well. Somebody
Correct.
would go there and take the that particular thing before me.
Yeah.
And the organization is very small, so if I need some kind of help, right, that is very
Mhm.
accessible. So I've joined their Slack as well, and I
Mhm.
can actually talk to the founders, which are the main contributors right now, because the team is not very huge.
Mhm.
So that helps me into getting connected to them, if I need any help. And also, one of the thing was, their whole project was very well set up, so setting it up was very easy, and everything was there on their contribution on their docs. So that was also one of the main reason for this particular project, that I was like, okay, I should go ahead and start contributing to this.
Super, Pratik. You are bringing up all the key points that I wanted to cover. Nice. Let's start one by one. Okay. Thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks so much, Pratik. Like few things that basically Pratik mentioned, and I so resonate with it. That a lot of people who have asked me this question during my one-on-ones and whatnot, it has always been around that, like, how do we find projects to contribute? First of all, you don't have to find the best project to contribute. When you are just starting out, see, whatever you like, basically, whatever action you take has a purpose. Think about the purpose. Like, for example, what Pratik mentioned, his purpose was to understand how to write CLI applications in Go. He wanted to find the best practices. Right? Now, did he go and pick the best, the most amazing project out there? No. And I'm not touching upon contributions yet. I'm just talking about which one to pick. Right? So we should not go and pick the best one, because it might be very overwhelming. And obviously, when you are just starting out, not just in your career but with massive code bases, it is very easy to be overwhelmed. Right? So it's important to not pick the, if you find the best one, amazing, go for it. But I've always found it quite intimidating that, oh my god, there is so much thing, I don't know stuff, and it just makes me feel like an idiot. I hate that feeling, although it pushes me to become better. But I just don't want to be overwhelmed. While the most important point that Pratik brought up was setting it up. Right? So I want to get started with the purpose that I'm looking for as fast as possible, because that's where I would want to invest my time in. That I don't know how to build Golang based CLI applications. Let me figure out the best way to build it by going through a decent enough mid-size open source project. This way, if I choose to contribute to it, I would be able to contribute to it if I choose to. Otherwise, at least the project would not be very much or filled with abstractions. Would not be very small with some not so good practices. So, all in all, something which lies in the middle, not too big, not too small, not too abstracted, not too straightforward, or not too naive. So you find a sweet spot to start with, so that eventually you don't get overwhelmed to start, and you focus and you stay true to the purpose that you are, that hey, I want to understand tech, if that's your motive to do it. Right? Okay. Thanks so much for that, Pratik. And one thing around the same point is, if you choose to contribute, and it's a very good point, especially for the open source projects, if you choose to contribute to a project, and if that project is very popular, what would happen is there are tons of contributors, and fortunately slash unfortunately, a lot of them do not operate out of IST time zone, right? So most of them are either in Europe or in US. So what would happen is for you to have a chat with them or for you to even pick the thing and get unblocked, you might have to wait for 8 to 10 hours gap and whatnot. So cross time zone working typically gets difficult. So it's better to, you know, not pick something which is sought after by a lot of folks to begin with. But once you're well versed, then it's not a problem because we have some solid Indian committers in Apache projects filled with Indian big data is filled with Indian engineers. Trust me, look at who created Apache Hoodie. Go through the profile of that person. You'd realize how amazing, like obviously you know how amazing Apache Hoodie is. But if you look at Startree, the company who built look, the core contributors of Apache Pinot, Kafka, right? Big data. Right now, we are in a very good place where if you look for big data papers, you'll find Indian names everywhere. Right? Indians own that space. Right? I don't know what's the reason. I'm not being racist here, but for some weird reason, I always see big data, a bunch of Indian names there. Right? So, which is where, with respect to the time zone that we operate in, it's very important to understand that they are not going to wait for you to get started and all. Neither would you want to wait because it just frustrates. So, pick one which just suits you, solves your purpose. Right? Okay, so thanks so much, Pratik, once again for adding those points up. Uh, Anyone else? Let me pull in Shubhra. Subhrajit. Sorry. Yeah, Subhrajit. Any specific code base that you picked up? Any example that you have? Few learnings from there. Subhrajit, unmute.
Yeah, so I was working with multiple code bases recently, like Python, Golang, Rust, etc.
Mm,
So I started with some Golang open source project. I was working with one of the organization, and their code base is like quite good, well structured
mm,
before my previous organization. So
mm,
from that I got inspiration, and like I tried to explore some open source Golang project, and then
mm,
I found some Race Tech Foundation and some other organization. They are also like structuring the code bases, understanding it, like and all. So what I try to do, like I take up any repo that is presented and how they are like
mm,
uh, build it. So I try to
mm,
find out their Docker images and all, and try to use
mm,
that apps first and know their functionality. Then I start the exploring the code bases. What there is some starting command or some starting function is there. From that, then I try to explore how they are going. So like um, so I have some weird experience with Java, so I am more comfortable with Golang. So like the control flow of the code bases is like quite nice. Like you can
mm.
go through the code bases easily without stumbling upon that. So yeah, so that's my journey. You can say like I have not contributed on open
Super.
source, but yeah.
That's fine. Hmm. But you brought up some very interesting points. So your like whatever you spoke about was all centered around setting it up, right? So let's talk about it. So let me ask you a question. Was like did you pick that project because it was easy to set up?
Um, No, I try to find some library that is that uh, I will work with it. Like I need that library or something like that. If it is not library or some apps, then I try to find out similar apps who has already a Docker image on it.
Mm,
So I don't have to do the going through his whole like README file and set it up on my local
mm,
machine. So
mm,
like first I use it. So if it is usable and
mm,
I know the apps flow, then I can
mm.
easily go through the Docker images, and from the Docker images you can find the how to build the code and all. So
That's a brilliant point. That's a brilliant point, Subhrajit. So just to add to that, and I'm so sorry to cut you off in between,
Mhm.
but one really good point that Subhrajit added is ease of setup. Right? So a lot of times what happens is, um, initially, like when we start exploring a big code base, what happens is it's not just about just exploring the code base. It's about you feel confident going through the code base when you can make changes to the code base and see it in effect. Goes for open source, goes for your workplace also. Right? Imagine you joined a new company, you downloaded their GitHub repo to work on that. The README file sucks. You spend 3 days going through it, trying to set up and asking for help here and there. You feel like an idiot. And yeah, I don't know how to set it up. Hey, yeah, acha, that config file was there. Array, this config was missing. Hey, this config I forgot to add it in the file. Acha, this specific version of MySQL is required. It does not work on 8, it works on only 5.7. Who would write this in the document? Right? So this, especially not for sophisticated organizations like FANGs and all, where everything is streamlined, but think of an early stage startup where you might not be having a decent documentation to start with. So which is where the point which Shubhrajit was talking about the most was about setting up, that if the project is easy to set up and manipulate and see your updates in action very quickly, you prefer that object over the most famous one. Because in this project, which is may not have the ultimate practices, but it would still have decent practices, it would still be contributed by a lot of folks, so which means code would be pretty much standardized. With ease of setup, you are freeing up your bandwidth from, or you're saving yourself from getting frustrated. Arey, I don't understand this. Oh my god, I'm spending 2 days to just set it up and I don't know anything about it. Right? So that's wrong on so many levels, which is where pick a project that is easy to set up. So that's my, to be honest, that's my primary criteria. So I tried going through Node.js V8, sorry, not Node.js. So I tried to build Node.js from scratch on my Ubuntu machine. I was unable to do so, which is why I gave up on that. C Python, hey, two command dot slash configure, enter, make, enter. It created a binary python.exe with my printf changes in it. Done. So now that I have that confidence, then whatever changes I made, I can see it in action because I can build a binary out of it. Setting it up was easy. It gave me that confidence that I can go through this code base. Exact same thing happened when I explored Redis. I was not able to build MySQL from its source on my local machine. So I did not explore that much. I explored documentation of it, but not the source code. Right? So ease of setup is very important, where it's quite possible that some project might be the best one, but it's very difficult to set it up locally. It just eats up your time. Huh. If your purpose is to contribute to that specific project, go for it. Not saying no to it. But if your purpose is to learn a particular pattern, or how learn a particular algorithm or learn specific internals, prioritize a project for that specific thing that is easy to set up, easy to update, easy to see your updates in action. Right? This way you would save a lot of time. You would be spending a more time exploring the code base and making changes to it to understand how it works rather than setting it up. Right? So that's a very good one. Thanks so much, Obrajit, for adding that. Let's talk about one interesting point. Let's talk about the actual navigation of code bases. Like how do one navigate inside a big code base? Let me pull in Indrajit for that. No, sorry. Let me put in Indra Dhanush. Indra, go on. Indra, you're on mute in case you're
Hi,
speaking. Go on.
I think you broke off for me at least. So, can you repeat the question?
Yeah, I was asking, how do you navigate in a big code
Yes,
base?
absolutely.
What are the things? Yeah.
So one thing for me is like I've actually thought about this a lot, and honestly, I don't contribute consistently for the last few years, and I've thought about like why. And what I found is like my motivation to towards contributing to open source comes from the fact that it's about a tool that I am using. So one example comes to mind is there's a really nice tool called WTF Util. It's like your personal dashboard in the terminal, so you can see stats, calendars, GitHub notifications, and everything. And I found an issue with it, or I wanted an improvement with that tool, so I started contributing to that tool. And then when, obviously, spoiler alert, when I stopped using that tool, I stopped contributing to it. So the main motivation for me is that if I'm using something and I find a problem with it, I'm going to go look into the code base and try to fix it. And that is one of those untapped sources. Like it's a very legit concern that like what project should I contribute to? Anyone who is not a part of an organization, let's say Kubernetes or Go or whatever, probably faces this problem anyway. So this is an untapped potential. Like you're using wget, maybe you saw an issue with it, go look up the code base, go try to contribute to it. And then obviously tapping onto what you mentioned earlier is if you want to learn about something. So for example, quite a few years ago, I want to learn about queues. And there's this nice library called ZeroMQ. And I wanted to learn how it works. And I started looking into it. And then I happened to be that just at that time, the Go client library for ZeroMQ was kind of in an alpha, somewhere between an alpha and a beta. And then I saw an opportunity. Oh, let me try fix these things, or let me try to. And yeah, the more you get into it, it's like work creates more work. So when you start looking into it, maybe you don't know what you can contribute to, but then when you try to run the example, you see, oh, okay, this is not working. And that's exactly what happened with me. I tried running the example. I thought, oh, there's a problem. Created an issue. Got in touch with the author. Started contributing to the repository. And again, another spoiler alert: doesn't matter what code base it is. If it's 1,000 lines or 5,000 lines, the grind is going to be there because it's something new to you, right? It's something you haven't seen. So that grind is not going to go away. Doesn't matter if you're a junior engineer or a senior engineer. That grind is going to be there the initial few days or weeks, depending obviously on the complexity. So it's not so much about like, oh, I can start contributing right away. That time investment will be there if you want to really contribute to it. So yeah, that's kind of my experience so far.
Thank you so much for adding the last point, especially that grind is definitely going to be there. And I don't know where I read this, but it's so true. Everybody wants to learn, nobody wants to study. And that's so true. Everybody wants to contribute to, let's say, open source or a big code base, but no one wants to take the time and effort going through it, understanding the practices, building that, like understanding the code base, understanding the problem statement at hand, coding the solution, writing the test case, following the linting practices, following the conventions, and then contributing. It's huge pain. It's not just about writing the core business logic, but ensuring it is correct and whatnot. There is so much peripheral that basically surrounds that, right? So it takes a lot of investment, time and effort both. But if you can pull that off, there's nothing like it. Right. Thanks so much. But you still did not answer my question. Like, let's say you picked up a project. Let's say you were talking about that. Hey, you went through zero and again, you also brought up a very interesting point, like how Pratik's intention was to understand a particular tech. Indra Dhanush was more like, hey, I was curious how it works. Instead of looking at a particular practice, he was very curious about how I do, like how this entire thing works. Let me go through that. So it could be curiosity, it could be you want to learn something specific, implementation, practice, or whatnot. Whatever is your motive, go for it. Right? But Indra Dhanush, basically my follow-up question on that is, let's say you downloaded the repo, you basically cloned the repo of ZeroMQ. How do you navigate in that code base? How do you figure out how it works? What's your thought process behind it? Is there a structure to it that you follow?
Yeah, it might sound dumb, but it starts with a lot of just adding a bunch of print statements, honestly, and trying to understand what's the control flow in this big mess of code that I'm looking at, just to kind of get an overall flow that, okay, if if I
But how do you pick the first file? How do you pick the first file out of it?
in the case of, okay, so there are two examples. In the case of 0MQ, I
Hmm.
was fortunate enough to have some examples from the README that I could just copy paste and then run and see that stuff in action. So that helped.
Hmm.
In my former day job, it was an open source code base. What I did is, like, on day one of my day job, I set up the dev stuff, dev environment, and then I just opened the browser and I opened the browser console and I just created an account and I started tracing the requests. And again, there also I was fortunate enough that it also had tracing, so that made life a little bit easier. But even then, even
Hmm.
without tracing, if you forget tracing for a minute, just look at what are the requests that are being sent to your backend and start tracing that. Okay, what are these endpoints? And then start looking, okay, what are these endpoints? What are the handlers for these endpoints? And start going through it. And that's when it really opens up. And then you're trying to figure out, oh, do I want to look at 5 requests or do I want to look at 1 request at a time? And obviously, it becomes like a huge labyrinth, like you mentioned a little bit earlier.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
like I said, the grind doesn't go away. I found myself going back and forth a dozen times, looking at the stuff like, wait, I'm so lost right now, right? So
Hmm.
yeah, look at open. If it's like a web app, the best way I would always do, doesn't matter what that is open the browser console and fire up, like, open the homepage and see what's the first request that goes to the
The
backend.
network tab. Network tab is your
Yes,
best
yes,
friend.
absolutely. Network tab and print statements.
Hmm.
I mean,
Yeah.
it works. It's simple and it works.
It's childish. It's not as sophisticated as debuggers, but
It
it
works most
works
of the time.
every single
Yes.
time. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Oh,
But
another thing I will
go on, go
mention
on, go on,
though,
go on.
is that, like, and this is like the first few days, right? And then once I kind of
Hmm.
know, okay, this is, let's say, this module or package is what I need to make the changes, and I've got like a bunch
Hmm.
of functions which I have no clue what's happening. I'm going to open,
Hmm.
see if there are tests, and
Hmm.
and then I start reading the test with the code side by side and try to understand what is the test doing. Because when I start looking at the test, I kind of understand how this function is intended to be used. So yeah, when you mentioned the debugger thing, that just occurred to me again,
Hmm.
that just
Hmm.
looking at the tests are kind of like a documentation, uh,
Hmm.
like a live documentation of sorts, in my opinion. So I look at the test and see, like, okay, how is this happening, and what are the mocks being set up for this test. Then I understand, okay, so this function maybe needs a database handler, and this function maybe depends on this other service which we are mocking in this unit test. So that kind
Hmm.
of starts filling in the gaps, one small chunk at a time.
It's really interesting. Like looking at test from a live documentation perspective is really interesting because someone has put in an effort into actually stating and if that code base has a good test coverage, you would exactly know what it is supposed to do and what it is not supposed to do. You get the error states also and the success states also from that. But okay, so you touched upon print statement. That is, although that is childish, it just works. I did the same thing with C Python codebase and Redis codebase. I just added, like, I just try to find out the main function or the main file. That's it. I start from there. But but one thing that I have definitely observed is in a big code base, it is not always possible to trace the entire flow from the main file because you don't know which function is getting invoked when and what and how. So apart once the first change that I always make is find the main function, add a print statement, try to build it locally, see my changes in action. Step 0. Once that is done, I make random changes in random file. For example, as I was giving an example of addition of two numbers in Python, I said underscore add or add function, and I found a few traces, got a convention pi number add, reached to that function, made the changes to it, and saw is this the one that get called. Accidentally did not. It was not the function that was getting called. It was a deprecated function. I didn't know that. Then I figured out another function, and that function was getting called. And that's how I got to know, acha, this is what is happening. Acha, if it is integer, this happens. And then just by adding simple and stupid print statements, rebuilding the binary again and again, I was at least able to go on a 0 to 1 journey. Again, I'm not pro at that code base, but at least I got started, right? So I won't, like, at least I know how to find stuff. I got accustomed to the conventions of it, right? So Control F is your best friend. Try to identify patterns in the file and whatnot. That's how you do it. Pick a favorite code base and start doing it, to be honest. Then make silly and stupid changes. Although it sounds childish, do it, because don't spend time setting up debuggers on day zero. It's important to make silly changes and understand it, right? Then going through, and I'm just basically summarizing a few amazing points that basically Indradhanush added, was around reading the examples from the README. Either README has the examples or there is a dedicated examples directory in most code bases, most good code bases. Go through them, right? That would give you the hints on what examples are there. Copy paste it, see the flow, you might find something. Then tracing the functions one after another, you might go deeper left or right, you will be absorbing most of it. If it's a web app, network tab, best thing ever. You exactly know which API is getting called, and then you can trace from there. Test, very important. If the repository has test, go through them, right? And at the end, documentation, it might not be a dedicated documentation, but when I say documentation, think also about comments in the repository, throughout the repository. Like the Redis repository has so many amazing comments which talks about what algorithm it is using, how it is using, how it works. Same goes for C Python. I understood more C Python by going through the comments above and below the business logic than going through the source code, because going through those comments made me so comfortable. I found like this is so easy to understand, right? So because if some developer or some engineer has taken out time to write a documentation or that comment above the code, and obviously it's not very obvious, but that does help, right? So that just sets the context, making it easier for you to understand the code base, right? So thanks for that. Thanks for that, Indra. Okay, so the wanted to touch upon a few more points on the navigation part. Let me pull in. Wait, I'm just removing one and then I'll add few more. Just making those quick changes. Let me add Raghunath, legacycode.com. Hey Raghunath.
Hey, Arpit.
Yeah. I just wanted to hear your thoughts on navigation of the actual code bases. Any pointers on that?
I can share a few things.
Sure.
Okay. So the first thing I want to talk about is we're talking about massive code bases, right?
Mm.
So it's a very subjective thing when people say massive.
Mm.
It's a very different number, right? And when you
Mm.
speak with most developers, when they say if you ask them like how big is your code base, people would not be able to give you an answer, right? They would say it's big, but oftentimes they
Mm.
would not get a concrete answer on that, right?
Mm.
So for me, if you're approaching a code base, it's important for you to build confidence as you spend more time on the code base, right? And if you're able to build confidence as you work on the code base, that means you're doing it right.
Mm.
So there are a few
Good.
things that I would recommend people to do, right? There are certain things
Mm.
that I do, and some of them I build my own tools and things like that. But the first thing that I would ask people to do is to install this tool called Clock. It's CLOC. So Clock
Mm.
is a tool that will help you find out like what are all the like how big is your code bases, right? So for me personally, when I work with clients, one of the criteria that I choose to deal with is if one of the criteria, right? If the code base is less than 500,000 lines of code, I don't even work with those clients, right? Because
Mm.
I have this feeling that I would not be able to contribute enough to their code bases, right?
Mm.
And once you start working on a lot of different code bases, and when you start looking at the size of the code base, like simple metrics like how many lines of code are there, that will actually help you like get a feeling that you know the code base better, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then when we talk about navigating the code bases, there are 4 different ways in how people can understand code base. Some of them are very common and some of them are not. The first thing is leveraging the runtime aspect, right? You have an application, you run the application, you interact with the application, or you run the application, set debug breakpoints. So that's the runtime aspect of it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that is something that is very common with people, that people do it, right? And the second thing, you can get more information from the code base is by reading the code base itself, like the code itself, right? Like it's basically the, like it's
Mm-hmm.
just text, it's just text all over the place,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So that is also very common with people, right? And the
Mm-hmm.
third thing that is less common, I'm talking strictly from a JVM aspect, is the class files, right? Because class files contain a lot of information, and if you know how to leverage that kind of information, it becomes much more easier to comprehend code bases, right? And one of the tools is that I've written is public, is called Eureka, and that was exclusively built to help people understand very large code classes, right? Like even if it's a 2,000, 3,000, 5,000 line long class,
Mm-hmm.
it sort of filters out all the unnecessary information and then shows you a dependency graph and a call graph, and that can fit into a single screen, right? So class file, at least in the Java aspect, but if you don't have like a equivalent binary representation, if you can parse the source file, because basically a source code is a graph, and if you can parse the source file, you can actually write interesting graph queries on top of it, and then um, find out a lot of information, right? It's a little bit more involved topic. I'll try to see how much of that I can cover, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the last aspect is the social aspect of the code base itself, right? When I say social aspect, there are team dynamics within the team, right? Like there is someone who is contributing the code base to a lot, and there is someone who's actually approving the pull requests. And these are things that you have to spend a lot of time in an organization to understand these team dynamics, or within even a team, right? But if you can sort of understand the Git history, that itself will reveal such networks inside the team itself, right? So you know, like who is connected to who has the most influence in the code base and who's contributing a lot to the code base, right? So there are like different viewpoints. It's basically like like imagine the story of like there is this elephant and then blind men trying to understand what a elephant is, right? So if you were to just like look at the source code from one direction, you would probably not understand a good have gain a good understanding of the code base itself, right? So what is required is for us to have this ability and the skill to look at this code base from various different angles, right? And once we start doing that, then it becomes a lot more easier, because Git history itself is very very helpful in contributing to code bases, right? So when I talk about Git history, the first thing I would say is, okay, you have a large code base, we'll come back to that. So for someone who's just getting started in a code base, right, all they have to do is to understand who are the people that they're working with, right? Maybe I'm working with Arpit, Revo, Rohan, Vipul, Kumar, right? And I could just say, okay, filter out and show me all the file paths that are being touched by these people in the past 3 months, right? And that will sort of help me to narrow down my focus to the area that I really want to work on, right? So essentially, when you have like a million lines of code, and say for example, like to just like give people a sense of a scale, a million lines of code, if you print on a A4 sheet, right, on a decent size font, that is going to be 50 reams of paper, right?
Got.
That is like 40, sorry, that is like 40 reams of paper, right? And that is like a lot. And if you look at people that have like studied colleges or even like competitive exams, what you read is much lower than that, right?
Yeah.
And this is also, it's a very non-linear thing. So it's very important for you to be very smart about how you're going to approach the problem itself at the first place. Like first is like cut down the focus and figure out like what to do, right? So that is one aspect of the code base. And when you look at navigating the source code, there are a bunch of interesting things that are happening here as well, right? Like say, for example, if you take a source code, like say, for example, the IDE has a file tree, right? And one of the things that I think like more people knew about IDEs is IDEs are created to write code. They are created to build your code, source code, right? They're not optimized to for reading, right? So, one simple example, and that's a common example for most people, is when I say syntax highlighting. Almost all of us can't write code without syntax highlighting, right? And almost all of us can't read code without syntax highlighting, because we think
Yep.
syntax highlighting is required for both reading and writing code, right?
Yes.
But syntax highlighting in the current form is not optimized for reading, it's only optimized for writing,
True.
right?
Yeah.
So, like, say, for example, I did an experiment with a bunch of folks, and I'll tell you what the experiment was. It was an experiment with syntax highlighting itself, right? So, what I
Mm.
did was I built a custom syntax highlighter, and then I took this piece of large function that was like 2 pages long, written in Kotlin and RX Java, right?
Mm.
So, Kotlin is it's a programming language, and RX Java is a completely different programming paradigm. It's about
Yeah.
reactive functional style of programming, and a lot of people may not be familiar with the RX style of programming. It's basically events happening over a period of time, right? So that's a completely
Mm.
different paradigm, right? But we use all of these tools to solve a business problem in general, right?
Yep.
So the syntax highlighting change that I did was, you take this code and then print it on a A4 sheet of paper, like 2 sheets of paper, and then show it to a person who used, like, these are people who have never done Kotlin in their life before. Like, these are like Python developers, JavaScript developers, other languages, right? And the moment people look at it, they get overwhelmed, even though there's syntax highlighting, because they don't understand language. They are like still struggling to process what is going on, right?
Mm.
But then there is another variation of the syntax highlighting where you only highlight the identifiers of the function name, the parameters, and the variable names inside the function, right? And then
Mm.
you again print it out on a piece of paper, and then the same paper I handed over to a bunch of folks. And then the moment they looked at it, they were able to understand what the code exactly did, right? So when you talk about syntax highlighting is, someone could still build a plugin that works on several IDs that does whatever I just explained, but there are certain patterns that we are so used to that people think that we can't do better, right? But that's
Mm.
not very true.
Got it. That's a very interesting way to look at. I never looked at syntax highlighting, but basically when you said that syntax highlighting is optimized for writing and not for reading,
Mhm.
I kind of first disagreed, but when I thought about it, it actually makes sense that although it helps me skim through it, I am actually used to it, but it does not help me navigate like how we have the modern layouts of keyboard. It's not very efficient for writing, but we just got used to it.
Correct, correct.
But
Like, say for example, when you
do you have any specific sources for this?
oh, this is an
As
experiment that
in
I did. There are like a bunch of
hmm,
experiments that I keep doing. But one of the things I would recommend is, if you folks can, if someone is more interested, you can go to the media tab on my profile. So you would like see like a lot of ideas and tools that I build, and then I show to the people to see how I approach reading code bases, right? And the second thing about reading large code bases is, I was talking about the file tree. Sorry. So when you
hmm,
look at the file tree has only two sets of information, right?
hmm,
One, it gives you names and some way how things are organized in your code base, right? And the other
hmm.
thing is, it just gives you the names of these files and folders, right? There's like only these two things, and
Yes.
and you can't get more information out of this, right? So
Hmm.
if I probably show you like a source, a file tree, people may say this is the important part of the code base just by looking at the names, right? They could say, okay, this looks like something that is very important, so this is the place where I should probably start, right? So a file tree has too much information, right? And it does not give you information about what is the most important part of the code base, right?
Got
But
it.
then,
Hmm,
if you
hmm.
take the same file tree, right, and then there's this visualization called as a sunburst, right? So a sunburst can actually show you the size of every file in directory. You can visualize the size of the contents of the directory or the files using a
Is this a
sunburst.
plugin?
Sorry.
Is this a plugin? Is this a
It's
plugin
a
that
tool.
exists
It's a
already?
tool. I can share access with you. It's a prototype. Like, I'm building a production ready version of it, but then it's a prototype.
Hmm,
There's some screenshot on my webpage. I can find it and then
hmm,
share it on the thread.
hmm, hmm.
So what it does, it basically, okay. Let me just like share it. I think so. It's much more easier to follow. Uh,
It looks like you are like reimagining the entire ID.
yeah.
Is
So
it?
yeah, that's correct. But then I would not call it an IDE. I'm like saying that, how do you like? So for me, the underlying philosophy is, your source code is a graph, right? So it's a graph
Hmm,
database. That's what it is, right?
Hmm.
And if the source code is a graph database, then you could still write queries to understand your code base. Like say, for example, there are tools, at least in Java. One of the examples that I would say is called JQ Assistant. So
Hmm.
JQ Assistant is a tool that can scan your entire code base, and then you can start writing interesting queries on it. Like say, for example, if your code base has like 4 different feature flagging mechanisms, right? And you don't really know what these feature flagging mechanisms are, you could describe them and then say, find out all the places where the code base has this kind of feature flagging mechanism. And then that'll tell you like the
Hmm.
first mechanism is in these 4 different classes. The second mechanism is like in
Hmm.
20 other places and that sort of thing, right?
Got it.
I've also
By
shared
the way,
a,
Raghu, I'll need to stop you
yeah,
because like we are slightly digressing.
all right.
Digressing, that's why, right? Just for the interest of time. Otherwise, it would go on for like
I
11:30.
understood. Yeah,
Right? That's
absolutely.
right. So
Yeah.
sorry, but this is pretty interesting. Just check out basically legacycode.com.
Yeah.
There are a bunch of visualizations. There is an open source code base. Also, I'm on my computer. I'm actually doing it. I'm actually navigating. Seems scary the graph visualization, but it looks quite helpful to be honest. Pretty neat, Raghu. Thanks so much for
Yeah.
sharing that.
Thank you, Arpit. Yeah,
Yeah,
thank you.
thanks. Okay, so few points around this is one specific point that I wanted to touch upon, which Pratik started with, and he touched upon a brief was, and which actually Raghu also mentioned, was the social aspect of the code, right? So for every code base, as Raghu was mentioning and as Pratik touched upon, is asking for help. So for a code base, looking at the Git commit history, you would easily be able to recognize, you would easily be able to identify that who has last contributed to a similar line that you're looking at. Just ping that person. Just ping that person and ask that, hey, can you help me with it? And obviously, before you ask, do your homework. Like you should not be asking very silly questions. People say that there are no stupid questions. There are some, especially the ones where you don't do homework, right? So you need to do your homework, you need to spend time trying to understand, and if you are failing to understand, then go and ask. And that is one thing that I have realized that actually works really well is when I am prepared. Like one thing, by I was going through the Spark code base and I was unable to understand a thing. First few weeks at Google, this is what happened. I went without any preparation because I was anxious given the complexity of the code base, and I asked two really stupid questions to my senior, and I felt stupid the entire week. And but what happened was the person did not make me realize I was stupid. It was more like that when I asked that question, and when that other person asked me a counter question, that counter question probed me. Arey yaar, this is what I should have thought. Right? So if you replay these things when you're going for the social aspect to understand the code base, if you replay the thing that happens, that would happen, that you're basically probing yourself before someone else does. As simple as that, right? This just helps you build a context, like build a deeper context, and also helps you not ask stupid questions. Like at least stupid in the sense that something that should have been quote unquote googled, and here googled means something that is easily figure outable, right? So but there could be a situation where even though you have struggled and you're still not able to understand, in those cases it's fine, because you would have counter in case the person points out that, hey, did you check this? You can say, yes, I did check this, right? So the social aspect is really important, and once you have spent enough time on the code base, it's always better that you do this, the debuggers. So for languages that support debuggers, in today's day and age, almost most of them learn how to use debuggers. I'll give you a very good, very practical example. I was not able to understand how Redis is single-threaded and still accepts multiple connection. I was not able to figure out it from the source code where it is written. All I did, connected it to a debugger. It's a, hey, see, debugger, did you use GDB? Yes, I did use GDB. Did I know GDB? Not at all. Did I learn how to use GDB? Obviously not. I just asked ChatGPT, I want to understand how to use GDB to figure out where and how this is called. It gave me the exact steps. Control C, Control V, done. right? And that's how you learn. Now there are a lot of tools available that help you with almost spoon feeds you, but you just have some bit of grasp on those concepts, be it debuggers in your favorite language. You don't need to know them in depth, but at least enough that helps you get unblocked quickly, right? These are two things that I definitely wanted to bring up. Okay, so before we move to the next part, I'm just pasting a link. Not this. Sorry, I am just. I just wanted to paste the link to the form. I'll just paste it in a minute. Link to the form where, if you like this space, just leave the idea for the topic that you want me to touch upon. We can have a brainstorming slash discussion for that. I'm basically kind of loving it that every Sunday evening I get this time to do it. So I'm basically looking forward more to that. I'm just dropping a quick tweet, so that you can post it there in the Google form. This way, it would be a little more structured, and it would give us enough runway to cover interesting topics. So just spare some time, go through the thread, and help me with some topics just to drop that. Right? Okay. So few things that I definitely wanted to talk about in the next part was we talked about how should we pick a code base. Uh, sorry, we started with why should we pick a big code base to navigate. First was workplace, second was open source. For open source one, either it is your tech inclination to learn a particular tech, or second, learn a particular practice, or you are just curious about how things work. Either way, whenever you're motivated, go for it, right? Then the next phase is about, now that you have picked up a code base, understand it, that don't pick the most famous, the best open source code base in the world, because there does not exist any. Pick the one that helps you fulfill your purpose, whatever your purpose is. If your purpose is to contribute to a specific project, do it. You have to pick that up, right? But if your purpose is to basically fulfill your curiosity, or just go for that, right? So whatever you want to learn, just learn that specific part and get out of it, right? Then we touched upon the first steps of it, that it is important to set things up. If a project is difficult to set up, I would recommend skip that one and pick another code base that serves the same purpose and is relatively easier to set up. So I never spent a lot of time setting it up. If it's easy to set up, then only I deep dive. Otherwise, I don't, because focus is very important. I always say this, that clarity is not what you think you know. Basically, clarity is not what you think you know what to do, but it's what you know you definitely don't want to do. I definitely don't want to waste my time setting it up. Rather, I would spend more time fulfilling my purpose, which was like understanding a particular pattern, code base, or algorithm and whatnot. So don't be attached to a specific code base unless you really just want to contribute to that. Then once you're set up, make the first change, see that change in action, right? For you to figure out the change, find a main file, control F is your friend, absorb the pattern, absorb the conventions, go for it, right? Comments, ultimate source, it gives you conventions, patterns, hints, algorithm details, whatnot. Examples, directory, readme files, network tabs, documentation here and there, great, right? And then comes control F being your friend, comments your friend, be a little more advanced. Like once you're comfortable, connect with debuggers. You don't need to know sophisticated uses of debuggers, but at least a decent one, right? One final thing is, although these are good, right? One biggest hurdle that comes in is, how do you find good code bases, right? Pratik in the initial part touched upon this, that he uses few things for us to solve for discovery. Sorry for that. Is he refers to Google, basically searches on Google, good projects, something like that. Then Twitter, someone shares a good project, someone is building something in public. You can refer to that project to figure out what they are doing, how they're doing. Just skim through that. Then follow the right people on social platform. Really important. People who share deep tech stuff helps you become better engineers rather than random stuff that people keep posting. Few things that I want to add on the side is we have Rohan in this space. I just follow Rohan. So basically, Rohan is a system programmer, brilliant one. I don't understand what he speaks. I have no idea, but he is mind-blowingly awesome. So what happens is I follow him on GitHub. and whatever he likes, whichever repo he starts, whichever person he follows, I follow that same person, right? So I have 2 or 3 such people, and through them I discover new code bases. So this is what I have been doing. GitHub feed, to be honest, is the most underrated place for you to find good projects. Not just to contribute to, but even learn from. So GitHub feed, very underrated. So follow right people on GitHub. Keep starring the repositories you found interesting and amusing. And on GitHub, you can actually, while you are starring a repo, you can choose which category you want to put it in. This way you can just organize it if you want to. I don't do that much, but this way I have start some really, like, I stumbled upon Dragonfly DB because of Rohan, because Rohan started project and it came in my GitHub feed. And then I said, hey my God, this is such an amazing project. Then I went through that. Right. So this is what it, and there are a few other folks that I found because of Rohan. So just if you go through my profile and see the repositories I have started and see people I follow, you might find those people. Right. So just do that. Right. And I do star a lot of good repositories. So in case you want to give me a follow, not I want followers, but more like the repos I star, you also get in your feed. Right. That's a good source. And apart from that, Hacker News is a very good source to find interesting projects. For example, the Terraform thing that happened, unfortunately, a lot of people don't even know about it. So now Terraform changed their license, a very good infrastructure as a code tool. They changed their license. People forked out Terraform, created Open Tofu. See, this is what is happening. Elasticsearch changed their license. Amazon created OpenSearch, right? So a lot of things happen in the open source world as well. Keep an eye. For me, Hacker News is a good place to discover interesting projects. In most cases, they are open source, and that's how I stumbled. So to summarize, GitHub, Hacker News, Twitter are my sources. Pratik added Google, and to follow the right people on social platforms, definitely yes. But for me, following right people on GitHub worked better. So that's my personal preference. But do whatever works for you and spend time going through the code base at least to start with. Right. Okay. So these were the key points that I wanted to cover on navigating code base. And as Raghu was mentioning, going through the grind is essential. It's non-optional. You have to do it. There is no way out, right? Always remember, there are people, everybody wants to learn, nobody wants to study. The people who study, they triumph. So put in those efforts, keep learning, keep grinding, and that's how we all become better engineers, right? So I've made a tweet. I have a meeting at 11, so I will have to drop off. But thank you so much for joining. I've made a tweet about basically sharing a Google form. It would mean a lot. If you have any suggestions, any specific topics that you want me to touch upon, you want us to discuss, more than happy to pull you folks in and know. Like today we had fab discussion. I've taken bunch of notes on that. So I'll obviously share it on. I'll obviously be sharing it on Twitter and on YouTube. Right. So yeah, thanks folks. Apologies I could not pull Neha and Akash in. I saw you folks have requested, but I need to drop off. I have a meeting at 11. I need to prepare for that. So yeah, thanks folks for tuning in. For tuning in Sunday late evening means our time. See you folks next Sunday with a new topic. I'll make an announcement of it soon.